Back at it again with Adam Recklow. Last week he taught us about JavaScript objects and functions and event listeners and more. If you missed the video last week, you want to pause and go check that one out. Today, Adam will be taking us through a practical project using everything that we learned last week to make a clock that changes color as time moves on. That's just what I always wanted.
So in the last video, I showed you how we could refactor our code to make it a little bit more functional in nature. And we're going to carry that forward as we build out our last project, which is going to be a hex clock. And a hex clock is basically going to be a clock that gives us military time. And based on that number, we're going to change the background because each number we can make into a hexadecimal color by just putting a hash in front of it. So to kind of start out this project, we're going to first get the time of day. So this will be the first part of this lesson. And to create a function, we use the keyword function. And I'm just going to give it the name time, and then parentheses and curly braces. We're not going to be passing in any arguments, so there's nothing to put in between the parentheses. And to actually get the time of day, we're going to use a nice helper function which is the date object. So to create a new date object, I'm just going to declare a variable, call it date, and then say new date. And if we return the date and we console.log this out, then we can kind of see what the new date object looks like. So I'm going to change view. I'm going to go to debug mode. I'm going to right click, go to inspect element. Then I'm going to go to console, and here we have the new date object, and it has a set of key value pairs that we can look at. So we have a constructor, get date, get day, get full year. What we want is get hours, get minutes, and get seconds. So these properties or keys are what we're going to use to actually get this information. And if you can see, the get seconds property or key actually calls the get seconds function. So that's how we're going to actually be getting the information. So if we go back over here, close that. Instead of returning date, what we can do is say var hours equals date.getHours. We can say var minutes equals date.getMinutes. They can say var seconds equals date.getSeconds. Okay, so now we actually have the information relating to hours, minutes, seconds. But just to kind of clarify a few things. One, when we actually call this function date.getHours, we're actually getting an integer back. And the other thing about this is if hours, minutes, or seconds is less than 10, then we only get one digit. We don't get two digits. But what we're going to be creating is a hex clock. And we need to have 6 digits. So we need to make sure that we are padding the digits that are the numbers that are less than 10 with a 0, so that when these numbers are combined, they actually create 6 digits. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array. And I'm going to map over hours, minutes, and seconds using the map function that's available to us in JavaScript, which gives us a callback function. And for each of these iterations that we go through, so map is just saying, okay, pass in hours, and then what do you want to give it as far as a name? And I'm just going to give it this instance variable num. So when hours gets passed in, it's going to be given num. Now what do we want num to do? Well, we want num to, if it's less than 10, be padded with a 0. So what we can do is say return num less than 10 question mark. So this is called a ternary operator. So this is asking the question, is number less than 10 question mark. If it is less than 10, then what do we want to pass back? We want to pass back 0 plus the number. And if it's not less than 10, then actually what we want to do is not only just pass back the number, but we also want to pass back the number as a string. And the reason why I'm doing that is because just to make it easier as we return this number later on, and you'll see what I'm saying. So now that we have this new array of hours, minutes, and seconds, we can then reassign these values to the values in this array. So for example, we can say hours equals array 0, and we can say minutes equals array 1, and seconds equals array 2. So just to kind of fill you in, JavaScript uses a 0 index, meaning that this is the index 0, so it starts at 0 and then goes up from there. It doesn't start at 1. So this is 0, this is 1, and then this is 2. So now that we've reassigned hours, minutes, and seconds, we can now return that information back to the function and whatever we're going to pass that along to. So hours, minutes, seconds. And the reason I did this is because if all of these were integers instead of strings, so here I changed these values from being integers to strings, even if they're not less than 10. And just to clarify as well, whenever you put a string in front of an integer, it will then combine that into just a string. But let's say that all of these numbers are greater than 10. Well, all it's going to do is actually add up hours, minutes, and seconds. It's not going to concatenate those elements into a string. So what we would get is, whatever 20 plus 30 plus 50 is, instead of actually making that into one string. So now if we save this, then inside of our console we should get a number. So I just saved it, and now in the console I get 13, 37, 31. And if I do it again, and maybe there's a number less than 10 in there, this next time they instantiate it, okay, maybe not, but if you save this and refresh the page and the seconds is less than 10, what you'll see is 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and the same for the rest of them. If the hour is less than 10, you'll get 0 in front of the hour. If the minute is less than 10, you'll get a 0 in front of the minute. So here we were able to use some functional programming techniques, such as using the map function and using the date object to help us to then retrieve what the time of day is. And this is the first part of creating our hex clock. So in the previous lesson, I showed you how we can use some helper functions like the date object, and how to use functional programming like the map function to help us to get the time and be able to pass that on to a new function, which we're going to create now, that is actually going to display that information on the page. So to start with this, we're going to create a new function, and I'm just going to call that output. And we know that it's going to take the time, so I'm going to put in the argument time. And to make time into an actual hex color, I'm just going to change this and put a hash in front of it. So I'm just going to declare a variable color and just set it equal to the hash plus time. So now that we have that, what we can do is we can change the background color, and we can put inside of the body tag the content, the hex color that we have. So for example, I can say document.body.bg color, which we've seen before, and I'm going to set it equal to color. And what I'm also going to do is say document.body.text content, and also set it to color. And if I want to see this be output onto the screen, I can put output and then time, and call time. And if I open up my screen, I should see down here we have the time of day, which for me is 13:57:51, the time this was instantiated, along with the hash in front of it, and I have the corresponding hex color that relates to that time. But we wanted this to be a hex clock. We didn't just want it to show, just one color for the time of day. We want it to actually be repeating every second so that the color changes and the time changes every second. Well, what JavaScript provides to us is a nice helper function called setInterval. So I can say setInterval, and setInterval takes a callback function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out, put it in there, and it's going to output. But if you notice, it still is not changing, and that's because setInterval not only takes a callback function, but it also takes a time period that you want this function to be called. And we want it to be called every 1000 milliseconds, which is also every second. So now what you should see on the screen is the color changing along with the time of day. So in the previous lesson, I showed you how we could output the time to the DOM and how we can use the setInterval function to allow us to change the color and the number every second. But we don't have very much interactivity at this point, and to kind of finish this project off, I think what we could do is create some type of interaction where when you click on the screen, it stops the clock, and when you double click, it'll repeat the clock again. So to kind of start out doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called init, and this is a convention followed by many different programming languages, and init just means initialize. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out that function, I'm going to put it in there, and what I'm also going to do is I'm going to set this function to a variable and call it tick. And just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to put all that on one line. So now what we want to do is, instead of just having this out in the global scope, when we actually want this function to run, we can just call the initialize function, and it will initialize it and get it to start. So now what we want to do is we want to add some interactivity. So we want to add a start click and stop click. So I'm going to create two additional functions. I'm going to call it start click. Takes no arguments. And a stop click, which doesn't take any arguments at the moment, but both of these will take arguments, but I just want to create the function first. So the stop click is actually going to listen for events on the body of the document. So to do that, we just say document.body.add event listener. and we're going to listen for a click, and we're going to get a callback function of that event. And what we want to do is we want to clear this interval. And there is a function that's available to us called clear interval that will, when given the variable of this interval, will then clear it and stop it from working. So just like before, when we used a callback function, we're going to need a callback function here because, as we know, this add event listener click is asynchronous. We don't know when it's going to fire off, but when it does fire off, what we want to do is call a callback function so that that function can then clear this interval. So what I'm going to pass into stop click is a callback, and I'll just name it callback. And then what we also need is the name of the interval that we have. So then under here, what we can do is we can say callback and then name. And then we can say stop click, and we can now use clear interval, and we can then put in the interval that we want to clear, and that's going to be tick. So the way that this would work if you weren't using just a callback function is all you would have to do is just say clear interval and then give it the name. But what we're doing is we're passing clear interval and tick into this stop click function. And what's happening is when the document listens to a click event, we're going to then call clear interval with tick. So just imagine that this is what's happening here. So now if we actually click on the screen, we should see that it stops and the interval has been cleared. But what if we want to begin that click again? Well, what we need to do is we're going to listen to an event listener, and we're going to listen to not just the click, but we're going to listen to double click on the screen. And what we want to do is we want a callback, and we just want to initialize this function again so that it'll start over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a callback, and in this case the callback will be this initialize function. So start click callback will be init. So what's happening here is this gets initialized again, so it's going to get called again, and when it gets called again, it's going to initialize all of this information and then start clicking after every second. So if I click on the body, it stops, and if I double click, it'll start again. So if I click, it should stop, and if I double click, it'll start over again. And it's only working here as I click on the number, because like we mentioned previously, when you create a body tag, it will only take up as much space as the elements within it. And this has a text element, and the body now is only taking up as much space as this is. So if I click in this area, this line here, then it'll start clicking. So if I click here, it'll stop. If I double click, it'll start again. So now we have a fully functional app, you can say, that changes color, changes background based on the time of day. It also changes the time, and we also have this added feature of when we click, we can stop it, and when we double click, we can start it again. And if you want, you can go through and you can maybe make the body a little bit bigger. So we can say that say document.body.style.height equals 100 view height. And let's see if that, yep, that worked for us. So if I click anywhere on the body, it'll start. And if I click anywhere else on the body, it will stop. So now we have a fully functional app. And I guess only at this point in time, you can just go in and change the styles.
Thanks, Adam, and to the patrons of the show who make it possible to pay Adam to make these videos for us. Patrons get these videos early, and they get extra videos also, but they also get other things like podcasts, live video chats, group text chat. Join us at patreon.com/devtips to check out, the community, see what that's all about. Thanks again, Adam, for making our lives better. I'll be back next week to show you a new thing that I learned with CSX Box Shadow. Until then, keep on hacking.